What is war? What is the cause of war? I'm sure some of you have asked yourself that question before. Others perhaps not, even when playing a first-person shooter video game set in an actual war zone here in peaceful Switzerland. But let me assure you, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you, as the Marxist revolutionary Leo Trotsky once said. Indeed, given the number of ongoing international crises, including the bloody conflict in Ukraine, the Mad Max fighting that is happening right now in Libya, the civil wars in Syria and Iraq, and the ongoing slaughter in Afghanistan, Trotsky's quote might not be as far-fetched as it seems. However, what I would like to do is perhaps help you think about war differently, or perhaps tell you how not to think about war. Still, in order to move forward, we need at least some sort of definition what war is about. And I would like to provide one of my own. War is a muscular solution to a political problem that cannot be solved by compromise, inevitably involving the deliberate killing of human beings. Inevitably involving the deliberate killing of human beings. This is a fairly standard definition that variations of it that you can read in textbooks. It's widely accepted among military strategists, generals, Western politicians. It is both systematic and it is succinct. Yet within this definition lies a problem that I would like to highlight today, or perhaps there are various problems of this statement that I would like to highlight today. For one thing, by saying that war is a solution, I not only sell short the real complexities of war, but I also offer a clean-cut instrument for policymakers to use to solve political problems without having to enter a compromise. This alone would be bad enough. However, what I would like to focus on today is the impact of high technology, the high-tech industry, military technology on war. And I think there's they are having a very important impact. The stuff that you see in Hollywood movies, I'm talking about drones, I'm talking about smart bombs, I'm talking about any kind of semi-autonomous weapons systems, precision-guided strikes, I'm talking about high-tech soldiers, so-called special forces. All of these things have become favorite instruments of policymakers to use when dealing with international conflict. It let our political leaders make some very, very bad choices, geopolitical and geostrategic. They not only have shielded us from the true horrors of war, but most importantly, they have also lowered our threshold for going to conflict, into a conflict. Now think about, for example, the ongoing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've visited both countries multiple times as a military analyst and a journalist. In both countries, military technologies and special forces have been used to patch up largely failed military and political strategies. And let me just say one thing here. No war in human history has ever been won by relying on superior military technology and special forces. Yet every single war in history has been lost by men and women with boots on the ground. That is a conventional regular army, such as the Iraqi National Army and the Afghan National Army. As a consequence, if we send our special forces and our technology over there, our drones and our smart bombs and everything, they can only do two things if the Iraqi army and the Afghan army cannot handle the conflict on their own. They can either prolong the stalemate, or they can just prolong the time until the inevitable defeat, because the Iraqi army and the Afghan army cannot hold off the insurgents. There is, however, another problem with military technology and international conflict. And that is, if we believe in the West, in the United States and Europe, that military technology is some sort of panacea for solving conflict, for winning wars, for fighting wars successfully, so do our allies, because that's what we teach them. Such as, for example, in Afghanistan. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the Afghan province of Nangarhar, a province that is bordering Pakistan. There, ISIS has established a foothold, the Islamic State of Khorasan. And I was embedded with an Afghan unit engaged in a fight against ISIS. And when I was at the front line, in a trench, overlooking a village where some fighting was going on, artillery shells were firing over our heads, the Afghan Air Force, it does exist, was showering enemy positions with machine gun fire, and I was talking to a young Afghan soldier there, and I asked him, what he thought about who is going to win this war. What is the role of the United States going to be? Is he happy with what the West has provided Afghanistan? And his answer was pretty straightforward. He told me that he felt that the United States and the West had betrayed Afghanistan, that they had abandoned Afghanistan, which I thought was a pretty astounding statement, given that we are still pouring billions of dollars into the country, that is the United States and NATO countries, and still thousands of our troops are stationed there. Now, I asked him, why does he think so? And his answer was pretty simple. He said that he believes the United States no longer supports Afghanistan and the Afghan government for the simple reason that when he was being trained by US military advisors, they told him that their drones, their military technology is so accurate that it can shoot off an orange from an orange tree. Now he told me through a translator, if that is the case, why can't the United States and NATO countries kill all the Taliban and all the ISIS fighters who are substantially larger than an orange? And he was that serious about it. For him, it was a confirmation that the West has somewhat given up on Afghanistan. And I think this is a very important lesson. He thought that the West has given up because we have sold him a picture of what military technology can do and what our special forces can do that is not really corresponding to the reality over there. The same is true for Iraq, of course. However, there's yet another issue with this religious belief in the redemptive nature of modern military technology. And that is, the more we rely on modern military technology, the less we're exposed to the horrors of war. That is semi-autonomous weapon systems, remotely controlled drones. All of this is just distancing us from the battlefield. And this is on top of that all our troops in the West usually have to travel thousands of miles to fight an enemy in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in other countries, where no matter what the outcome of that battle is, it will not directly impact their loved ones back home. No Western soldier knows what it feels like to have to drop everything that you're doing, leave your house, leave your ailing parents behind because they cannot walk and you cannot carry them. You cannot use your car because all the roads have been choked up because of traffic. Drop everything that you worked for all your life, lest you be killed, your house set on fire, your daughter, wife, and mother raped by an enemy, because this is what war has been like for thousands of years, and this is how war is like these days in places such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Excuse me for being so graphic here. But I think this is an emotion that very few people in the West have really, really experienced. 2 summers ago, I was in northern Iraq, right around the time when ISIS, which at that point was still largely an unknown organization, it had sprung up around that time, June 2014. And when ISIS turned its eye on Kurdistan and the few remaining Christian cities in northern Iraq, including the ancient city, Assyrian city of Karakosh. When the onslaught on Karakosh began, the Kurdish militia forces, the so-called Peshmergas, which means those who face death, all of a sudden abandoned their positions outside the city of Karakosh, although they had pledged to defend the city. As a consequence, the remaining Christian population of Karakosh, which at that point had a population of around 30,000, all had to flee to Kurdistan, to the capital city of the autonomous province of Kurdistan, which is part of Iraq. And they all had to flee on one single highway. And most of them had to leave their cars behind, everything behind. And when I was talking to the survivors the next day in one of the many refugee camps that had sprung up in Erbil, they told me tales of rape, murder, torture, all the stuff that I was describing earlier on. And the men that I talked to were openly weeping. And they were not weeping because of what they had seen or what they had experienced. They were weeping because of their utter and complete helplessness. They were begging me that I should tell the Western public that they need weapons, that they need ammunition, that they need anything to be able to retake their towns. And they knew at the same time that that would not happen, just because we were at that stage disengaging from the region. This is also an emotion that no Western soldier, let alone a Western politician, has ever experienced. Indeed, all our wars have been fought on the shoulders of our soldiers. And even among our soldiers, only a tiny percentage has actually seen combat and has actually seen some of the horrors that I've described about war. But still, none of them had felt anything close to what those men in Karakosh experienced. And I believe that although war can never be humane, in order to keep some humanity in war, we need to be confronted with the horrors of war and be exposed to the horrors of war. Otherwise, we would overindulge in it. And I think that's something that has happened in the Western world over the last couple of years. This idea that wars can be fought on the cheap because of our reliance on military technology. As the American General Robert E. Lee once said in the 19th century, or rather, the American rebel Robert E. Lee once said, "It is well that war is so terrible, otherwise we would grow too fond of it." And I think he was talking about something very important, because it's a natural human emotion in many, many ways. Now, I think a belief in the superiority of modern military technology is tantamount to the Nazis' belief during the end of the Second World War in the so-called Wunderwaffen, the miracle, the magic weapons. And we all know how that turned out to be, what the result was. The war was prolonged for a couple of months, a couple of more million people died. And in order to close my little speech here, I would like to once more go back to the 19th century and US history and quote from a speech of my favorite president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, who also during his lifetime had to face a terrible war, and he tried to make sense of it when he was delivering an address to Congress and tried to tell his audience how to think about future problems and how to deal with this issue of war. And he said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, we must think anew, we must act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and by doing so, save our country." And I believe we in the West, in the United States and Europe, must also disenthrall ourselves from this belief that military technology can help us make wars less bloody, less costly, and easier to win. War is not a science. War is an art. War is always one thing only: cruelty. It's always about choosing the lesser evil. This, I think, is the inevitable price that we have to pay for being human and all too human. Thank you.